It is my distinct honor and privilege to stand before you today as we reflect on the life and legacy of one of Antigua and Barbuda's great sons, Vigo Blak, Joy Lawrence, Petra Williams, Barbara Arundel, Joanne Hillhouse, and many other persons, some unknown to me, for sharing their knowledge from which I have benefited in preparing for today. 5 years ago, in May 2021, many of us, for the first time, learned the name of Vigo Blak. Since then, we have gathered together every last Sunday in May to remember him and to celebrate his legacy. The story is told that the Thwaite sisters and their husbands, Methodist missionaries, themselves free Black women, sought to establish a school to teach enslaved people, and they had spotted a beautiful site, our present location, on which they wished to have the school, no doubt to create a more formal framework for the fledgling education then being afforded to enslaved persons by other enslaved persons across the estates in Antigua and Barbuda. My apologies. I'm so accustomed to referring to us as Antigua and Barbuda, but the story really is peculiar to Antigua. We are told that when Vigo Blak learned of this idea of the Thwaite sisters, he promised them that once permission was given by the landowner for the land to be used for the school, he would get his fellow enslaved to build the school. Permission was given, and led by Vigo, for the next 6 weeks, his team of enslaved men, women, and children devoted their evening and early morning hours to building what would eventually become the first formal schoolroom built to teach enslaved people in Antigua, which was opened on the 29th of May, 1813. As Ralph has already indicated, it was a structure of 44 feet by 16 feet, with a roof made of the trash of sugarcane and a floor made of raw earth. And when it was finished and ready, during the daytime, elderly, disabled, and those unable to work on the plantations came. And in the evenings, between 200, 300, sometimes more enslaved persons engaged on the plantations came to learn to read and to write, to gain basic literacy skills, which importantly allowed them to pass on their knowledge to others. Poetry, Bible passages were a primary source for teaching in that era before emancipation. Because we will remember that in 1813, although the slave trade had officially been abolished in 1807, Antigua was a British colony whose society, economy, and politics were dominated by the sugar plantation system and slavery. The enslaved were denied freedom. They were denied opportunity for advancement. They were property, chattels, owned by slave owners. The story of the establishment of the school by the work and efforts of Vigo Blak, an enslaved man in that era, was nothing short of amazing. But the Vigo Blak story is much more than the retelling of a historical event. It is a story of community and governance, because governance speaks of the way in which a community organizes itself, how people are empowered, how opportunities are created, and how the community prepares future generations to participate fully in national life and to strengthen and make sustainable and resilient the community for the long term. When viewed through that lens, Vigo Blak was not simply a historical person who built a school. He was a nation builder. He was an early advocate for empowerment. He helped lay the foundations for the education of his people. a foundation on which I and all of us now stand. In the early 19th century, at a time when enslaved people were denied freedom, denied opportunity, denied the right to learn, Vigo Blak understood something revolutionary, that knowledge is power. He understood that literacy and education was more than learning to read words on a page. Education meant dignity. It meant self-worth. It was liberation of the mind. Education was preparation for leadership and national engagement. And so, because he had the vision and understood the possibilities, Vigo Blak became associated with the establishment of what is now recognized as the first schoolroom for enslaved people in what was then called the British West Indies, at Bethesda in Antigua, where we now are. Think about the significance of that. At a time when systems were designed to exclude, he created inclusion. At a time when ignorance was imposed, he promoted enlightenment. At a time when people were denied a voice, he invested in the future voices of a nation, our voices. That is governance in its purest and most transformative form. Good governance does not begin in the halls of power or in government. It begins in communities. It begins in families. It begins in classrooms. It begins when ordinary people decide to uplift others. It begins when people have the opportunity to learn and be empowered through education. Today, throughout the world, countries speak about sustainable development, democratic participation, transparency, accountability, and citizen engagement. Yet, all of those ideals depend on one fundamental requirement: an informed and empowered people. Without education, democracy weakens. Without civic understanding, accountability suffers. Without opportunity, inequality grows. Without historical consciousness, nations lose direction. Vigo Blak understood this long before modern governance frameworks and development theories were ever written. His contribution reminds us that education is not simply a social service. It is an instrument of national development and democratic stability. An educated population is better able to understand its rights, demand accountability, contribute ideas, and participate meaningfully in public life. And that is why the story of Vigo Blak remains profoundly relevant today. As Antigua and Barbuda continues to evolve, we face modern governance challenges, strengthening public trust, preserving democratic institutions, promoting integrity and accountability, pursuing and ensuring equal opportunity for all, engaging young people, and protecting our national identity in a rapidly changing world. These are not challenges that government alone can solve. Overcoming those challenges requires citizens who are engaged and committed to the common good, and importantly, are informed and educated. And this brings us directly back to the legacy of Bethesda and Vigo Blak. The Bethesda School represents more than education. It represents community empowerment. It represents hope. It represents the belief that people, regardless of status or circumstance, possess inherent worth and potential. That lesson still matters. Today, when we invest in education, we invest in governance. When we preserve our history, we strengthen our national identity. When we teach civic responsibility, we strengthen democracy. And when we empower young people, we secure the future. And there's another important lesson in the Vigo Blak story. the power of local leadership. History often celebrates those who hold high official titles, occupy high office, or command political authority. But many of the people, you know them, who truly transformed our societies, have done so quietly, through service and sacrifice within their own communities. Vigo Blak reminds us that leadership is not confined to government office, because we know he held none. Leadership is influence. Leadership is vision. Leadership is the courage to improve the lives of others. In every generation, nations require people who are willing to build rather than merely criticize. People who are willing to educate rather than divide. People who are willing to serve rather than simply seek power and wealth. That is the kind of leadership our region continues to need. That is the kind of leadership that Vigo Blak exemplified. And so today, as we honor Vigo Blak, we are not merely remembering the past, we are being challenged in the present. We are challenged to ask ourselves, how are we investing in our own people? What guidance are we providing? How are we preparing our youth for citizenship and the responsibilities of leadership? What real opportunities are they being given? How are we strengthening integrity and accountability in national life? How are we preserving the values that define us as a people? More importantly, what is the legacy that we, individually and collectively, will leave behind? That's something to think about. Because the true measure of a nation is not only its economic progress or development. The true measure of a nation is the strength of its people, the character of its people, the quality of its institutions, the depths of its values, and its commitment to justice, opportunity, and human dignity. Vigo Blak's life speaks directly to those ideals. His legacy reminds us that transformation often begins with a single act of vision, one classroom, one opportunity, one decision to uplift others. And from that beginning came generations of learning, growth, leadership, and national development. That is the enduring power of education. That is the enduring power of community. And that is the enduring power of good governance. As we celebrate Vigo Blak Day, I urge that we not simply admire history from a distance, but rather that we draw inspiration from it. May we recommit ourselves to building a society where education is valued, integrity is protected, accountability characterizes our national public life, communities are empowered, young people are inspired, human dignity is prioritized, and good governance is rooted in service to the people. And if we do that, then the legacy of Vigo Blak will continue not only in memory, but in action. Thank you very much.